This is the news, reported by Chet Huntley and David Brinkley.
Nguyen Van Thieu, president of South Vietnam, today offered to hold private talks with the National Liberation Front. Thieu said he would never agree to a coalition government for South Vietnam, but that was not a condition. Otherwise, he said the talks could be two-sided or four-sided, and he hinted they could be held anywhere except in public, but Thieu suggested Paris. President Thieu's statement touched off an avalanche of speculation and guesswork. The National Liberation Front delegates in Paris declined to comment. It should be remembered that South Vietnamese Vice President Key made the same offer in January, and nothing happened. In Washington, President Nixon, in a speech to the National Association of Broadcasters, seemed to place special emphasis on the possibility of secret and private negotiations.
Any negotiated peace is concerned, it will come from private rather than public talks. Because where both sides, and I'm referring now particularly to the North Vietnamese and the South Vietnamese, have a problem of prestige and a problem of face among many others involved, that kind of negotiation cannot take place in a goldfish bowl with communiques every day, because there the tendency always is to speak to their people at home, but more than that, to the people of the world, and to simply repeat the old rhetoric. Most of the progress that has been made today in bringing about talks in a public forum has come from private talks. And so I can tell you that it is our conviction and our belief that it is through private talks with the North Vietnamese and others involved that real progress toward peace will be made. But if private talks are to be private, they must be private. And consequently, if I am asked, and this is true of the Secretary of State, and it's true of the Secretary of Defense, and my instructions, everybody in this administration, as to whether private talks have begun, as to when they will begin, as to what has occurred, we will say nothing. We think we're on the right track, but we're not going to raise false hopes. We're not going to tell you what's going on in private talks. What we're going to do is to do our job, and then a few months from now, I think you will look back and say we did what was right. If we did what was wrong, then it doesn't make any difference, the headline that we may have made today.
Prices are rising as fast now as they did last year, which is to say too fast for a stable economy. In February, the cost of living rose 0.4%, or at the rate of about 5% a year. That was in February, and the early signs are it'll be the same way in March. For this and other reasons, President Nixon will ask Congress to keep the 10% tax increase for another year. One of its purposes was said to be to help control inflation, though it has had no visible effect. It is possible, though, inflation would be worse without it. Beyond that, government spending on the military and other items is so enormous, it figures it needs the money. Today, William McChesney Martin of the Federal Reserve Board and Senator Proxmire had an exchange about inflation and interest rates and so on, and here's how it went.
Now, Mr. Chairman, I am reasonably confident that we are on the road to accomplishing the objectives for which we are striving. We will be seeing as the year progresses the results of monetary and fiscal policies working together to restrain inflation, and I might say this directly for the first time in a number of years.
And yet in all the testimony we have this morning, there are no plans, no programs, no suggestions for restraining business investment, explicitly at least. And an understanding that the programs we have probably will not restrain business investment in the future. Now again, as I say, I do not want to be unfair, but this seems to me to be the conclusion I must come to. That when suggestions have been proposed that would restrain business investment, you're either opposed to them, or you feel, and in every instance that this is correct, you won't comment. So that I just can't come to any conclusion except that we seem to be headed for more inflation, and that the source of our inflationary problem is the business sector.
The Huntley-Brinkley Report is produced by NBC News and brought to you in color by
Black & Decker. Men who work with power tools know you can expect the best from Black & Decker.
Men who build with power tools need power tools that can take it. Black & Decker power tools. Grinders for steel. Hammers for big jobs in concrete. Screwdrivers that fasten fast. Black & Decker power tools. Built to stay on the job long after the shine wears off.
General Westmoreland discussed with the Senate committee the possible expansion of the anti-ballistic missile system. The critics of the system take it for granted that once it is started, it will only be expanded at great cost. Westmoreland said a decision on expanding it will have to be made by the end of this year. So, as he put it, the ABM will continue to be responsive to any threats to the country. President Nixon, speaking to the National Association of Broadcasters, said the ABM would help protect against irrational acts by irrational people, and he used Adolf Hitler as an example of irrationality.
It is the power of the United States that has avoided a world war and a world confrontation. And whether it's in my administration or in the next, I never want the President of the United States, when he sits down at a conference table, to be in a second-rate position as far as the strength of the United States is concerned. Without the power of the United States of America, the rest of the world would be, in effect, at the mercy of potential diplomatic aggression, and that really is what is at stake here. We have a responsibility. We have met it ever since World War II, and I believe that now it is our destiny to continue to meet it, while at the same time, and I can assure you we are exploring this other road, to pursue every path toward peace and to pursue every path towards arms limitation, so that we can divert our resources to other areas than those of destruction.
He and Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada finished their conversation today. The president said he was invited to visit Canada and had accepted, but there was no date given. They talked about the ABM and the Canadians' understandable uneasiness about the fact that if they were ever fired, all those enormous explosions would occur right over their heads. What the president and the prime minister said about that was not announced. At the press club, Trudeau was asked about President de Gaulle visiting Canada again, and he joked his way out of it. He said, before they hear de Gaulle's opinion about separatism for French-speaking Quebec again, it might be better to see how he feels about the French-speaking areas of Louisiana. Chet?
Army doctors said this afternoon that former President Eisenhower remains in critical condition, but has shown no deterioration in the last 24 hours. A medical bulletin from Walter Reed Hospital said Mr. Eisenhower is resting somewhat more comfortably today, despite continued evidences of congestive heart failure. Here's a report from NBC News correspondent Douglas Kiker.
Spokesmen here at Walter Reed are being extremely cautious in describing General Eisenhower's condition, but private heart specialists say their reports sound ominous, that probably General Eisenhower is suffering a more sustained heart failure this time. The 7 heart attacks the general suffered before this have so weakened his heart muscle that it simply doesn't have the strength to pump all the blood his body needs. As a result, blood collects in the heart chambers and in the lungs, and because the kidneys fail, when the heart fails, the body becomes congested with salt water. Walter Reed spokesmen say that General Eisenhower is suffering from a severe congestive heart failure and is receiving vigorous therapy. All in all, that doesn't sound good, but this isn't the first time General Eisenhower has been close to death and has pulled through. Today, Brigadier General Frederick Hughes, the commanding officer here at Walter Reed, summed it up when he said, "This man's stamina is astounding, and so is his will to live." Douglas Kiker, NBC News at Walter Reed Army Hospital.
Ayub Khan, the soldier who took over Pakistan 10 years ago, gave up the presidency today and turned the country over to the Army. And the Army proclaimed martial law in an attempt to end the rioting which so far has taken several hundred lives. General Yahya Khan, Commander-in-Chief of the Army, was named by Ayoub to run the country. Israeli Foreign Minister Eban and King Hussein of Jordan have met in secret, probably in London, to talk about a Mideast settlement, according to authoritative Jerusalem sources. Now, at the United Nations, an American spokesman said 4 power meetings on the Middle East will start soon.
Which hand? Here, a cigarette with good, rich flavor. Here, one that's lower in tar than the best-selling Filter King.
It's so hard to choose.
Don't. Now, one cigarette, Pall Mall Gold 100s, gives you both. Newest U.S. government figures show Pall Mall Gold 100s now lower in tar than the best-selling Filter King. Yes, it's longer than king size, yet lower in tar than the best-selling Filter King. Pall Mall Gold. Pall Mall Menthol, too.
Come to the coolest part of the forest and discover the cigarette that tastes extra cool, extra mild. Pall Mall Menthol 100s. Extra cool, extra mild. Extra long at both ends. An extra length of cool-tasting tobacco. An extra long filter to smoke milder. Puff for puff, milder than ever. Pall Mall quality with menthol.
Communist China and Soviet Russia today continued their war of words over the border fighting around Damansky Island. China's official newspaper said the real Soviet enemies are what it called the renegades Kosygin and Brezhnev. A member of the Soviet Politburo said the incidents were a bandit blow in Russia's back. Since the first border fight on the 2nd of March, the Soviets have gone to great lengths to get their version of what happened before the West, both in print and on television. NBC News correspondent Kenneth Bernstein has obtained film of the second battle on March 15th. And here, by satellite, is his report.
After the first battle of Damansky Island, the Soviet border guards were reinforced. Thousands of incidents had been reported in the past several years, but that first massive battle of March 2nd had made this a war zone. Armored personnel carriers moved up to the Ussuri River frontier, and tanks were provided for their firepower. Then, on March 14th, there had occurred what the Russians called a Chinese incursion onto Damansky Island, which was repelled. It turned out to be a dress rehearsal. The east bank of the Ussuri became a staging area for a strong Soviet force pledged to defend what are called the sacred frontiers of the motherland. Although never mentioned in the communiques, Soviet helicopters were operational, presumably for reconnaissance, courier work, and the possibility of medical evacuation. Some of those now on guard were survivors of the first battle. Within hours, the rest were to undergo their first shock of combat. Toward noon on Saturday, March 15th, Chinese artillery and mortar fire landed on Damansky Island, according to the official report. In the rear, just across the frozen river, the troops in reserve loaded ammo for their automatic rifles and machine guns and sat in the snow awaiting the call. The temperature was below freezing, but the worst of the winter had passed. Other troops readied the handheld rockets kept in pure plastic bags until the time of final alert. In the snow, the battle plan was being laid out. As the Chinese launched a ground attack onto Damansky Island, the Soviet border guards moved out. The Russians say the Chinese force amounted to a regiment, plus supporting units. The strength of the Soviet border guard on this day has never been stated. On the Soviet side of the river, there are a few promontories, but positions have been set up at the most advantageous points, and the gunners settled down to wait for a target. Most of the troops were draftees, under 21, facing an enemy charged with brutality and atrocities in their first battle. With all the possible battlefields along the longest frontier in the world, the place where years of rivalry, ideological argument, and enmity exploded turned out to be this uninhabited island in the frozen Ussuri River, a brush-covered geographical footnote less than a mile long. The Chinese call it Chenpao Island and claim it for their own. The Russians call it Damansky and claim it too. It lies closer to the Chinese side of the bank, which is hilly, giving the Chinese two tactical advantages of distance and height. Soon after noon, this unit moved into battle. fired from their armored personnel carriers, then climbed out to join the fighters on the ground. The Russians say the battle continued in waves for 7 hours. The extent of Soviet losses has never been officially stated, but news reports in the Moscow newspapers in the days immediately afterward indicated that about 15 Soviet border guards were killed and at least that many more wounded. One of the dead was Colonel Demokrat Leonov, the border guard commander. His armored vehicle had been hit twice. He was the highest-ranking Soviet officer to die on the border. He was to have been a candidate in the local elections the next day. When it was over, the border guards came back to their camp, their white camouflage uniforms still white, those that walked. The border guards by now were the subject of top priority hero treatment. In the field hospital, the casualties were tended to for their wounds. In a display of patriotism reminiscent of World War II, many of the survivors applied for membership in the Communist Party and its youth branch, the Komsomol. This woman in white was the soldier's mother, dressed antiseptically by the nurses before her visit. She headed for the hospital when she heard news of the battle. Other next of kin were brought to the border town of Iman, population 30,000, for the funeral of two of the officers, a lieutenant and his commander, Colonel Leonov. Later, the Supreme Soviet of the USSR conferred on Colonel Leonov the highest military order, the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. Yevgeny Yevtushenko, the popular Russian poet, wrote, "Here on the purple March snow, there are scattered bloodstains like Mao quotation books." Yevtushenko got close to the average Russian with his anti-Mao tirade. Telling of a Russian border guard shot dead and then bayoneted, he asked, "What for? For his freckles or for his blue eyes?" This rare appeal to Russian racial feeling is contrary to the official line that the Chinese people are still friends, that only Mao Zedong and his associates have brought tragedy, treachery, and disgrace to China. Officials in Moscow are trying to keep the Russian people's anger under control. Perhaps that is why films such as you have seen has not yet been shown inside the Soviet Union. Kenneth Bernstein, NBC News, reporting.
Russia obviously intends to be fully prepared in the Far East. A Soviet fleet of 8 submarines and 11 surface ships has made its way out of the North Sea and is now southeast of Iceland. Just as the Russian fleet did in the Japanese War of 1905, it probably will steam around Africa and head for Vladivostok.
Do you think of your dog as a member of your family? Companion, protector, friend? That's the way the folks at Alpo think of your dog. A precious member of your family. When you buy a can of Alpo, we know you are placing your trust in us. We will never betray that trust. Alpo is 100% meat, because we know that your dog needs meat. Alpo beef, horse meat, chicken, Alpo lamb, liver. All are 100% meat, chunks of meat, radiant broiled, not a speck of cereal. Yes, Alpo costs more than ordinary dog foods. Naturally, meat costs more than cereal. But see what happens to your dog when you switch him to Alpo. Remember, not a speck of cereal. With Alpo, you know.
The Huntley-Brinkley Report continues, brought to you by Sherwin-Williams Paints. The paints people trust, from the people who cover the earth.
About every 3 seconds, someone, somewhere, opens a can of Super Chemtone wall paint. That's because more and more people are using more Super Chemtone than any other wall paint, for a lot of reasons. But probably the biggest reason is this symbol. It means that Super Chemtone is the best in wall paints. That's why more people use it.
For several years, there have been optimistic reports that the South Vietnamese Army was improving and could sometime soon take over more of the fighting and eventually all of it. Today, the Secretary of the Army, Stanley Reeser, told Congress the South Vietnamese Army will not be good enough to take over its own country's defense anytime in the near future. Chet?
The demilitarized zone between North and South Korea has been the scene of many clashes between Allied and North Korean troops. And against this background, the United States carried out an ambitious military exercise that had a twofold purpose. One, to bolster South Korean morale, and second, to see how quickly a large military force could be transported thousands of miles. A report from NBC News correspondent John Rich.
It was billed as the longest airborne assault operation in history, 8,500 miles from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, to a river valley in South Korea. .500 members of the 82nd Airborne Division, part of the U.S. Strike Command, flew to Korea on an exercise named Focus Retina. They joined other American and South Korean soldiers in mock combat less than 100 miles south of the demilitarized zone where real fighting was going on. Air support was provided by American fighter planes, part of the force flown to Korea after the capture of the USS Pueblo. South Korean Special Forces staged what they said was a simulated capture of North Korean Premier Kim Il-sung from his villa. They had also planned to have frogmen blow up a model of the USS Pueblo in the river, but the night before, the Americans talked them out of it. The Communist North Koreans called the exercise a provocation. They launched the heaviest series of shooting incidents this year against American soldiers guarding the truce line. In the worst clash, an American soldier was killed and 2 others were wounded.
Towards the MDL,
Sergeant Richard de la Martyr of New York told of the battle.
My group of 9 men, including myself, were putting the sign up, and they were out to my left and right flank, and we had a security force back up over on a hill protecting us, and all of a sudden they started breaking loose on us, and they hit both patrols at the same time and causing heavy casualties on our security group to the rear because they had us pinned down and they knew that they could keep us there where the other group could get away for some help. So we were pinned down for almost 7 hours.
How close did they get to you?
With my group, they got approximately 40 meters within hand grenade range. I popped my head up one time and saw 4 hand grenades coming at us, and my men opened up. We opened up on them and drove them back up on the hill so they didn't bother us with the grenades anymore.
One purpose of the airlift operation was to reassure the South Koreans. Because of Japanese pressure for reduction or removal of U.S. bases on Okinawa and the doubt about America's post-Vietnam military position in Asia, many of America's allies are worried. The airlift was intended to prove that even without overseas bases, U.S. forces could be deployed quickly from the continental United States. John Rich, NBC News, in South Korea.
We are putting the 3 leading sleep tablets to a dramatic laboratory test. One of them is Nitol. Of course, it's safe taken as directed. You can see which one it is because it dissolves twice as fast as the others. That's right, it's this one, Nitol. Nitol. It helps you get to sleep fast, and it has the Good Housekeeping seal. And now, Nitol has a fast-acting formula in a modern capsule. Introducing the Nitol Sleep Capsule.
We own this Italian restaurant. I wear dentures, but I have to meet so many people, I can't afford denture odor. I've tried almost everything, but nothing works for me like Polydent.
People keep coming back to Polident because no tablet, powder, or paste gives them the cleaning satisfaction of Polident. No wonder dentists surveyed recommend Polident over all other leading brands combined. No wonder denture wearers keep coming back to Polident.
The Supreme Court ruled that 6 Negro candidates were kept off the ballot illegally last November in Greene County, Alabama. The court ordered a new election. The court also threw out a Texas murder conviction, ruling that the suspect had not been told of his rights. Trading was irregular today on the New York Stock Exchange, a cautious reaction to the day's news on war and finance. The Dow Jones Industrials were unchanged, while an average share of common stock went up 6 cents. David?
A small movie theater in New York City is taking in more money than Radio City Music Hall, which is 10 times as big. The reason is the music hall is showing a family-type picture. The small movie house is showing a Swedish picture the U.S. Customs at first refused to let in, saying it was obscene. Well, now it is on the screen, and the customers are lined up down the sidewalk. Those who have seen this kind of movie and read the current best-selling novel may wonder if there is anything left the law does not allow. Well, there is. Last night, the New York police raided an off-Broadway theater and arrested the whole cast of a play, charging them with lewdness, obscenity, and other offenses. Some or all of the cast on stage were totally undressed, and the rest of what happened cannot be described on television. So there is something left the law does not allow, at least this week. Nobody knows about next week. Walter Kerr, writing in the New York Times, asked the rhetorical question, after what is now being done on the stage, what will they do for an encore? Good night, Chet.
Good night, David. And good night for NBC News.
Hey, lover, do you enjoy good coffee? But then you can taste the coffee acid. The flavor turns on you. Well, if you love good coffee, but not the taste of coffee acid, turn off coffee acid taste. Turn on rich, smooth kava. New instant kava for less acid taste. A smoother taste that never turns on you. Kava, 90% acid neutralized.
Marvin, will you look at that face?
The nose is familiar. Your mother, maybe?
What are they selling, Marvin?
I think it's kava, that low-acidity coffee.
Do you believe all that stuff?
What stuff?
You know, neutralizing coffee acids to get a smoother taste.
Well, you know how these commercials are. Like, what coffee could be smoother than what we're drinking now?
Marvin.
You don't mean?
Yeah, kava.
Alice, you know I hate surprises.
Tomorrow morning, the Today Show presents part